Hello YouTube. In this video I'm going to be talking about a topic that is very important for programming, which is the tree of specificity. Before you program, before you even decide on the template you're going to pick, the style, full body or push-pull leg or whatever, and the amount of days you're going to do it, you need to have a list of exercises. That is key, that is super important, because this is what you're going to build the program with. Beyond the skeleton is something even more important. It's the essence, and that is the essence, because that's what you're going to manipulate. That's what is going to be used to manipulate volume, intensity, frequency. All of that in reality is centered around lifts. How many times a week do you squat? How much volume do you do for a bench? All of the programming variables are applied to movement patterns. And so even beyond that, there exists a classification for movement patterns. And that's what I personally call the tree of specificity. And for movement patterns, some people say compound movements, but some movements that are not compound are also falling into that tree of specificity. And so this is an image that I want to share with you because I'm going to utilize it a lot, and I find that it facilitates the discussion. So I want you to picture a tree in your head, a great big tree. And this tree is going to be special because it's going to have only a select amount of branches. And each branch is going to have itself a few branches. Each of these represent a movement pattern. So the tree in itself is lifting, and one branch is going to be knee flexions. One branch is going to be hip hinges, etc., etc. All of those branches are closer or not to one another, meaning that the knee flexion branch is very close to the hip hinge branch, which is very far from the vertical pole branch, okay? All of that is a way for you to picture neighboring branches as being more relevant to one another, and that's going to be important for the rest. In terms of classification, at the top of the branch is going to be the best lift, the most important lift, and it's not objective, it's subjective, meaning that it's going to be the most important lift for you. Of course, there are certain lifts that are going to be much more qualified to do that. For example, the deadlift for a hip hinge should be at the top, but it's not a necessity. Okay, it's personally what I believe, but you don't have to believe that. What needs to be done, however, is that hierarchical order needs to be respected. So the lift at the top of the top is going to be your main priority, and the more you go down, the less of a priority it is. And on top of that, if you follow that same logic, it also means that the lifts that are closer to the top should be closer in specificity to the lift that is the king, because they need to carry over the most to it, they need to feel it the most, and by a retro effect, that lift also is going to feel it a lot. So if you think about rain falling down, the rain hits the tree, hits the top of the branch, and trickles down. So the volume and tonnage for strength progression is going to trickle down. The opposite is not necessarily true. So the lift that is at the bottom of that branch is going to have minimal carryover to the one at the very top, okay? So it's going to have less of an impact, but it's going to still have a decent impact on the lifts that are closer to it. But because it's at the bottom, it's going to be the one that is going to be the less prioritized. And you're going to regard it as something that is not necessarily going to give you much. And that is going to help, because just by doing that, you've already established that this lift is going to receive less frequency, less volume, less intensity. And that the lift at the top is going to get all of that and some more. So that is for the branch. I want to establish that vertical pattern simply because it's easier then to make you look at the branches on the horizontal plane. Because the branches, even though they're on a tree, let's say they grow like this, okay? So they grow like this, it's a strange tree. And so the way they're going to function is, the closer they are to one another, as I said, the more they carry over. Do they carry over a ton? No. And you will find also that a lot of the lifts that are down the line, at the bottom of the branch, carry over more to the top of the branch than the lift that is at the top of the branch that is neighboring it. So for example, two branches, hip hinge, knee flexion, deadlift, squats. Does the deadlift carry over to the squat? Yes. Does the squat carry over to the deadlift? Yes. What carries over most to the deadlift? The Romanian deadlift just underneath, or the squat? The Romanian deadlift. Okay. What carries over the most? Back hyper extension or the squat? The back hyper extension. Yes. Okay. How deep do you have to go down that branch to find a lift that is going to be less of a carryover than the squat? Quite deep. And for some people, it's not even going to happen. You might not even be able to find that. And so what's going to happen when it comes to the relationship between the two is you're going to regard them as potential carryovers, but it doesn't need to be this way, meaning that you cannot have certain lifts on that branch that are going to be programmed to carry over entirely only to that. You can have them carry over to both. So for example, in the hip hinge, there's going to be the good morning. Does the good morning carry over to the squat? Yes, quite decently. But does it also carry over to the deadlift? Yeah, amazingly. Some people would argue that it carries over more to the squat. I'm not going to say that. What I say, however, is that that's one lift that is on that neighboring branch that has an impact. So that needs to be understood too. It's not just vertical, it's also horizontal. The branches have relationships with one another. But the further away the branch is, the less of a carryover it has. So for example, all the way over here, you have your horizontal presses. Do they carry over to the deadlift? No, not at all. None of them do. And every single lift on that branch carries over more. And every single lift on the squat branch carries over more to the deadlift. That's important. What is the neighboring branch of the horizontal press? The vertical press. Okay, those guys carry over a ton. Same logic here. Okay, if you go down the list of horizontal presses and you find your flies, what carries over most to a bench? A fly or an overhead press? An overhead press. Okay, and that's why I said also that it's very important to include isolation movements in those branches and not just compound, because isolation movements are still movement patterns, but they tend to recruit less articulations and joints, and therefore their ability to carry over to the big movers is not as important. And yet they're still in there. Why? This is a bodybuilding channel. You need your isolation movements at all costs. But keep in mind that I keep them at the bottom of the branch. They're the least important. They'll receive the least attention, or still pay them attention, but not as much as the compound movements. So that's important. What that tree is going to do for you is, one, it's going to just collect every single lift you do. There's not a single lift you do that is not falling into a range of specificity. And as anything else in programming, if you do it, it's applying to you. Now you have two choices. Either you understand it or you don't. If you understand it, you control it. If you don't, it controls you. And for that tree, it's the same thing. When you add a lift to a program, it's in the tree. It's in one of the branches. It's up to you to locate it. Make a list. Look at every single movement you do, dissect them, separate them in movement patterns, and make your own list. What is the most important? What is the least important? Both subjectively and objectively in terms of carryover. That is going to be so important, and it's going to be so beneficial for you, because after that, when you program, every single piece that falls is not just a rock thrown into a pond. It's a piece of a puzzle. And that puzzle is going to make sense only because you have the blueprint of the puzzle, which is the tree. The tree keeps you alive. It's the tree of life, in a sense. And so you're also going to find on that tree that certain branches, depending on your personal dispositions, are going to be higher or lower on the tree. The ones that are the highest are the ones that you prioritize. So let's say you're someone who wants a big chest. Okay, the branch of horizontal presses is all the way now. It's all the way up. And it's also, guess what? The one that is going to receive the water from the rain first, because it's the first one that catches it. And that is key. I'm going to have a break for 1 second just to gather my thoughts, and I'll get back to you. So the rain. So the rain is the tonnage you're going to provide to the lift. And the ones that you prioritize receive it first. And therefore, the quality of the tonnage is going to be the highest, the quantity also. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the rest is going to get nothing, but it will get less. And that also means that this branch is supposed to grow faster. So you need to keep that in mind, because if it doesn't, there's a problem with the way you schedule your volume. And it also means that when it comes to recovery and overall strength restoration, rehab you have to keep in mind that this is the branch that is prioritized for everything. And by default, all the branches will have to go lower. It is technically possible to have all of the branches at the same level. it's not realistic, meaning that someone who has a perfect development of every body part equally doesn't really happen. One, because of genetic disposition. Two, also because of preferences. You might not want that. You might want a body part to be bigger. Understand that you have the choice. Understand also that the higher the branch is, the more lifts there's going to be, because the bigger the branch is getting, right? It's growing more. And so you have more space for exercises. And that is directly correlated and linked to work capacity. The strongest you get on a movement pattern, the more muscularly endurant you get, the more space you have for variations, and the more variations really you should be using to avoid overuse injury and just to have an ability to rotate lifts in the program. Of course, there's never going to be a point where the branch is so big that it contains 20 exercises, because at this point it snaps, it's too much, or it will start to actually shrink from the inability to maintain neurological adaptations on so many lifts. But it means that at the bottom of that tree is going to be a branch that is going to be very small. One, because you don't train it, or two, because it contains a few exercises. Size of the branch doesn't necessarily correlate with the amount of exercise, because between an upper body branch, horizontal press, and a lower body branch, like the knee flexion, there is going to be a slight difference in the amount of lifts that will be needed to be used. And so, as a small correction that I didn't really mention yet, in reality, the capacity of containment of the branch is not really calculated with the amount of lifts, but rather the amount of tonnage the lift produced. And so you see that a branch that has squats, post squats, and front squats might produce as much tonnage as a branch that has bench press, post bench, flies, push-ups, dips, etc., because you can just move so much more weight with the lower body. So that's something to keep in mind too when you do those lifts. Don't become greedy and don't try to match. When you look at a tree in nature, all of the branches are not the same length. Some are longer, some are smaller. And it's going to be the same in your program. You'll have movement pattern lists and trees that are going to be less important, and it's not a problem. As long as progression takes place, that's all that matters. And in terms of pushing the metaphor a little bit more, you also see that as the tree grows, the branches grow with it, and even if the branches are not the same size, as long as they keep growing at the same pace and speed, relatively speaking, it's still going to be harmonious. It's not like you have a tree that all of the branches are like this, and then you have a branch like this. It's also what you should be doing, is balance it out. You're the guy who takes care of the tree, so make sure that it's taken care of properly. And for that tree of specificity, as I said, you have all of those branches. You have to keep in mind also that some of the branches are going to come with a higher recovery cost, like the lower body branches, and some don't, like the upper body. And that is going to speak directly to frequency and big muscle groups versus small muscle groups. That videos I made about that are available on the hypertrophy series, but it's something to keep in mind also, because every single movement pattern list and branch is not born equal. They have different needs, and you need to take care of that, because in reality, we're talking about a tree here, but it's the tree of life. Every single branch on that tree is in reality a small tree in and of itself, but because it has many relationships with the other branches, they don't exist as single entities. There's too much connection and carryover with the rest. And that is sort of the end word of this video. It's the connectivity of it all. You cannot think of a program as something separated from the rest, because everything you do in your training, every movement you do, has an impact, but the impact can be minimal. So for example, if you do flies, don't worry about your deadlift recovery. You'll be fine. If you do squats, now you better pay attention, because it's going to damage your ability to perform on the hip hinge. And that has to be kept in mind. But that also is going to open up a lot of possibilities in the realm of supersets. Because if you understand that there is a lot of space in your program to fit tonnage that is not going to cost you anything. And that is going to save you a lot of time. And at some point in your training, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to realize that you can't just do a set and then rest 4 minutes and do another set. It stops becoming possible. And a good way to make sure that you can do it quickly, implement supersets in your program without losing performance or shooting your recovery, is the tree of specificity. Once you have a full understanding of the way it functions, it all makes sense. And if you have to draw it, draw it. Make your own little tree with your lists, and that is going to, I think, open your eyes. Because everything you do in your program, as I said, needs to be fully understood. And if you just understand what the lift does, but not what it does to its neighbors, you're not really understanding the lift, in my opinion. So that's going to be that for the concept of tree of specificity. I'm going to use it all of the time in my videos, especially the programming ones. And so I will always redirect people to this video if they ask what it is. I hope that the explanation was concise and precise. If you have any question in the comments, let me know. Have a good day.